Welcome into Warchant TV. It's big picture talk time, friends. You know it. You see him. He's the owner, founder, administrator, Gene Williams, in the left box over there, and managing editor, king of all stuff here at Warchant, Ira Schafel. I'm just a talking head. My name's Jeff Cameron, and we are glad you were on board because as Florida State took a huge step forward this year, now we get into the details of what it is to build a championship caliber program, sustain, hold on, acquire, all of those things. And that includes coaching right off the bat. We do believe, I think the three of us, that Mike Norvell will get a contract extension of some sort. The question is, how all in is the administration? How all in is Florida State? And how long-term will that extension be? And what were the dollars surrounding it? So, guys, a lot of questions to answer. They're all good ones. It really has to do with a turnaround season, and it has to do with Florida State winning a lot of games. Don't forget to like and subscribe here on Warchant TV, and make sure you get all of our latest videos and news as it happens. Ira, I'll begin with you. I guess for the ability to kind of understand where we're at. When Mike Norvell signed on, we're talking about in the $4 million range, and it goes all the way up with escalators at the end of his current deal to about $6.7 million. We think Florida State will step in here and adjust all of that. So that's where we're at. And we know, I think it's obviously a priority for Florida State. Let's just see if we agree on that first and foremost. You think this is a priority for the AD, Mike Alford?
Yeah, no question. I know that they've been working on this. It's something that Florida State wants to see happen, and we know that Mike Norvell's agent, Jimmy Sexton, will want to see happen. And I think going into this year, Florida State made a good faith gesture a year ago. They gave him that 1 year extension and gave him that year at the end of the deal, with that higher number. And I think Florida State they wanted to see it work with Mike Norvell, and they made a big commitment in the offseason. They increased the payroll for the support staff. They've given him the resources he needs to be successful. So now that you've had a 10-3 season, like, it would make no sense to not want to capitalize on that and lock him in. The challenge becomes, how much locking do you do? Like, how big of a lock do you try to put on it? And we don't even know how feasible it is even to lock a coach in these days because of the different buyouts and what schools are willing to pay if you have success. But yeah, I think Florida State's definitely trying to make that happen. I think Mike Norvell has made it clear he wants to be at Florida State. I think both sides are willing and able to do this, but I think it's going to come down to Jimmy Sexton's going to want as much possible, as many years, as much money, and as low a buyout as possible. And Florida State's got to do their due diligence to kind of rein some of that in. So it's going to be an interesting process.
Well, Gene, he's exactly right. We know Jimmy Sexton is going to try to wring Florida State dry here. How careful does Florida State have to be about moving forward with this deal and putting themselves in a situation that is untenable, perhaps, as they try to compete with other teams, perhaps trying to poach their now successful coach?
Well, experience is a great teacher, and I know this current setup for the administration was not the ones who were here for the last two coaches. But if you look back at what happened at the end of the Jimbo Fisher era and how easily he bolted without having basically any buyout whatsoever, and then being just, hung up by that huge amount of money you had to pay out to Willie Taggart when you left an incompetent coach on staff and had to fire him. So hopefully you learned your lessons from that and figured this out. But I'll say one thing, the administration, what they know is everything Mike Norvell has done, not just the wins and losses. And we've seen the dramatic turnaround, the jump in attendance, you see the TV ratings, everything's just skyrocketing up for Florida State. It's the other stuff he does. He's very well liked by the administration, the boosters. He's doing all the right things. The kids are staying out of trouble. So you see the value. Didn't work out too well the last two guys. This guy seems to be a guy, he's young, he's doing things the right way. The sky's the limit. So you really need to do what you can to lock this guy down, but you nailed it. It's that fight with his agent, Sexton. Not only does he want the big contract, the long term, he wants that small buyout because his favorite thing is guys bouncing from place to place because every time that happens, he's getting his cut in the whole thing. And I think Florida State, the area they need to stand fast on is to get that buyout. If he leaves for another job as high as possible, it doesn't necessarily stop him from leaving, but at least you get a nice golden parachute at the end if he jumps out because I'm telling you, man, if he does, and our own Iron, you're 3-2-1. Didn't you predict Florida State winning the ACC?
For next year, yeah.
Yeah, so let's say that happens. That means maybe that 11 wins. Maybe you even sneak into the playoffs. How hot a commodity is Mike Norvell going to be from what he inherited, the dumpster fire a couple of years ago, to where this program could be a year from now? there's going to be some SEC or Big Ten team with a lot of money to burn. We saw it before with Texas A&M, and some team might follow that and go after him. You better have a huge deal in place so he can't get out. So, but you don't want to throw money away either. I know you've seen it. We got the graphic of some ridiculous salaries that are being paid to some coaches right now. And I mean, looking at that, I don't think you can't pay him Lincoln Riley or Kirby Smart money. That's just Florida State can't play in that sandbox. But I guess that's a question back to you, Jeff, and you guys. How close can they get to those numbers where it's tenable for Mike Norvell and tenable for the school?
Yeah, so you're talking term salary buyout. These are all the interesting questions here surrounding what Florida State does. I do think there is obviously a mutual understanding here that they want to come together. Mike Norvell is very happy with what he's built. He's worked very hard. He loves it here. I believe that to be genuine. We know Mike Alford has prioritized this. We know that boosters and administrators and supporters of Florida State football of all kind are in favor in all likelihood of this. But you don't want to reset the market on Mike Norvell here. They still haven't won an ACC. They haven't won a championship, but you do have to protect yourself. So my question would be, Ira, then as you sit down with his folks, Jimmy Sexton in particular, what kind of numbers do you foresee? We saw the top end of the coaching spectrum here. We know Florida State's not paying Mike Norvell $11 million a year, $10 million, $9 million a year even, I think would seem strange. Do you look somewhere in terms of years to add on with an extension here? You step in and I guess you revamp this to somewhere 7.5, 7.9 to $8.5 million, extended by 4 years. What kind of numbers are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. There's a few key variables to think about. One is the length of the contract, as you said, because that's a big factor in terms of the overall guaranteed money. You know, if you push the years out a little bit longer, and we've seen this with Florida State through the years, two ways you can keep the annual number a little bit lower is by giving more years on the back end. Now that guaranteed contract's worth more because you're giving them an extra year or two. The other way is by having a low buyout. And Gene mentioned the very low buyout Jimbo Fisher had, which was almost non-existent for most of the time he was at Florida State. Well, the way where Florida State benefited from that was Jimbo Fisher agreed to a lower salary in exchange for not having that buyout. He wanted the flexibility. He was willing to have a lower salary compared to other coaches that had won national titles because he liked the flexibility of having that low buyout. If you start wanting to push that buyout up, well, you're going to start paying more money and you're going to have to give more time. That's part of the equation. It's the negotiation that goes on. I think one key factor here that we have to think about, and we saw that graphic with the national coaches, that's important. And Mike Norvell, I think, understands he's not going to be at that level right now. But what about the state coaches? Billy Napier is making $7 million a year. I think just over $7 million a year. Mario Cristobal is around $8 million a year. So I think a healthy raise for Mike Norvell would be, in the 6 and change range, maybe up to $7 million a year. But he's basically he's beaten both of those rivals, and Florida State's in a better position than each of those rivals. So can you get away with not giving him as much, at least, as Billy Napier or close to Cristobal? So that to me, I think is going to be a factor as well. What is the market, not just nationally, but in the state?
That's a great point, Ira, because you got to beat the state if you're going to be a championship level team. You got to beat them for recruits. You got to beat them on the football field. You got to beat them in perception. And Gene, I'll say this to you. Ira just threw around some numbers. I don't believe, you tell me if you agree, both of you can chime in here. I don't believe Mike Norvell's number will be below 7.5 or maybe even 8. I believe he's going to come up to that number.
That's a considerable jump for from where he's been.
Yeah. Well, his last year he was scheduled to make 6.78 or something like that in 2026. So you're not really, and again, I get that's at the end of the contract and they bump those things up, but still, I think when you just threw at those numbers of the two state coaches, there's no way I think Sexton is going to let him be the lowest paid of the three majors. So I think 7 is kind of the base. But again, it goes back to the point too. If you do 7, but you do a longer term, that could be tenable. If they want a little shorter term, then maybe it's got to be closer to 8 and you do a little bit shorter term. But again, and where they're going to do that buyout is usually based on a percentage of what is left on that term. So that's important too. So how many years are left? Are they taking 70%, 80%, whatever that is for the buyout? So that also factors into it as well. But I can't imagine him taking less, Sexton letting him take less than $7 million. But I think you're right. I think that 7 to 8 is kind of the sweet spot. Then the question becomes, the length, and then the percentage of that buyout. I think that's going to be the even bigger question here.
Do they, guys? I'm curious. So let's say we're having a little fun with this, and man, wouldn't this be fun to be the individual who's having the debate between 7.5 and 8.5 million dollars? But what I was thinking. So you add 4 years at 7.9. I'm throwing that out there. 8.2. Where do they? At what point does that? So they rip up what's left right now, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to rip that up and then come in aggressively. We think, or I do certainly. We can have a little bet on this, guys. Between 7.5 and 8.5 would be the sense that I get. We've all talked to close sources about where Florida State's at financially, how aggressive Florida State can stand to be. They are desirous of a football program that is as well thought of as it can be. We all know what else is hanging out there in terms of showing stability and success on the field and big boy money as you enter into that realm. We know that ultimately Florida State, we think, they won't talk about this, would love to get the heck out of this conference. And another way that you can show you're serious about being great at football and playing at the highest level is to pay your coaches that way. They're not going to be weak when it comes to hiring the next defensive backs coach. We know that. And I don't think they're going to be weak when it comes to Mike Norvell's salary in this extension. I don't. I think we're going to be looking at between 7.5 and 8.5.
Yeah, think about the things that we've seen over the last year. Again, since this administration has taken over, Michael Alford is the new athletic director, new president, Richard McCullough, new board of trustees chair, Peter Collins. They are clearly raising the ante of what Florida State's trying to do. They put the incentive in Mike Alford's contract when he became the AD that he has to get that football facility built. They just broke ground on that last month. He has an incentive for renovating Doak Campbell Stadium. They put in more money for support staff. They've added the support staff in scouting and other areas and recruiting. So they're inning up in all these areas. They're not going to try to be on the cheap with Mike Norvell after he just had a 10-win season. So I think we all agree with that. At the same time, there has to be some restraint because they have to be cautious because you look at what happened with Michigan State and Mel Tucker. They have a great year, and they just gave – the contract terms are nuts for him. There's other coaches, other examples we can point to as well where somebody had one big year. The administration felt like they had to bend over and give them everything, and then they're stuck holding the – so, and again, I think Mike Norvell is building something. I think he's going to be successful for several years. But what if you sign a long-term deal to lock him up and show that commitment, and then 2 years from now you're thinking, wow, maybe 2022 was a one-shot wonder.
Yeah, but that's an anomaly, right? Because how much does it help Mike Norvell that he's had 3 years and that he inherited a dumpster fire and he has now shown you over the course of those 3 years that he's building towards something? It isn't a one-year flash. It isn't that COVID year where Indiana won 10 games, for goodness sake, and they wanted to pay their coach a gazillion dollars. Would they lose 10 games this year?
So, Sam Pittman in Arkansas last year had the huge year.
I think Mike's shown more. Ironically, Mike had to wear all the negative publicity surrounding those one-year wonders, and maybe those guys go on to be good coaches. I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but because there were some examples, high-profile examples, in which coaches did get it turned around quickly, but they didn't exactly have the same set of circumstances as Florida State did, even though our fans like to believe that. Mike endured that. The comparisons were brutal, and now he's come out the other side. I think this is a sustainable bet on success moving forward based on the consistency and the job at hand that he's achieved in just 3 short years.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's something we've seen the example in college football. Look at Nebraska. Look at Texas. Look at these teams with unlimited resources, and they keep recycling coaches. Florida State's found a guy, and we saw the last 2 didn't work out. I think you found a guy who's done everything right. You see, it's not just he's won games. You see what he's doing. He's built the foundation. He's doing things the right way. I think you have a guy like that, you better hold on tight because you can get in that cycle of going decades without having like Nebraska, not having a viable coach. So you got that guy, hold on. So I think they need to err on the side. And I know these contracts are out of hand and these terms, but, man, you better err on the side of keeping him as opposed to going cheap. And I think having Mike Alford, who is a football-centric athletic director, unlike the last couple guys we had, I think it's going to go a long way to making that happen.
Hey, the good news is, guys, I think Willie Taggart's only got another year or so of collecting those checks. So it's
well,
all
he's
good.
supposed to get part. Now they broke ground. He's supposed to give $1 million to the practice facility. I'm sure he's doing that, right?
They're on the phone with him right now. Yeah. Hey, Willie, good to talk to you.
Where's
Sorry
that check?
to work out at FAU, but can we get that mill? Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting, guys. I do think Florida State's going to be aggressive here, and I think to the end of which we've spoken tonight, I do believe it's going to be more in line. Ira, you brought up a great point about what these other coaches in the state make. I think Florida State is a little ahead of those programs currently. They're a lot ahead of Miami at 45-3, but they're a little bit ahead of those programs. You're going to have to pay, Mike, commensurate to what those coaches are making. And, you know, I get it, the concerns, the big picture concerns, but we've had those concerns in college football for 20 years, and Jimmy's laughed at all of us. None of the administrations have decided to call his bluff. They're not going to do it because of the desperation to win football games and what it means to your school, what it means to the perception of the university. And of course, the bottom line is that Florida State has to be in good standing as they try to compete to you know, stay in line with the SEC. And also, final thing, and put a ribbon on this, guys. I think all three of us also agree that if somebody is nuts, and everybody in the SEC is, and they decide, I've had enough of losing, I want to pay Mike Norvell $15 million because we can, well, then you're just going to lose Mike Norvell.
But at least get a good check in the process. Get an $80 million buyout or whatever the heck it is. And, you know, hey, that'll help you build another facility or whatever, you know. So at least get something out of it. That's my point.
The good news is, and to put a happy ribbon on this, I think Mike Norvell appreciates what Florida State can do for him.
I do too.
I don't know that was the case with the guy a couple coaching staffs ago. And I think Mike Norvell wants to make it work here. So I think Florida State would get a hometown discount if something like that happened. But you know, at the end of the day, you're right, Gene, and I agree with you guys that if somebody goes crazy, you don't have to pay that also.
For Ira Chaffel and Gene Williams, I'm Jeff Cameron. We thank Ben for producing as well, and we thank all of you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. These are the kind of videos we're churning out, and it's getting more interesting by the day, guys, on Warchant.com, Warchant TV, Wake Up Warchant, the Jeff Cameron Show, and Seminole Headlines. As the topic is, how close is Florida State to locking in championship runs? And that includes coaches, administration, and players alike. So you're going to want to be along for the ride. Until next time, be well, everybody. Take care. Go Noles.